LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the February 17th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend's 18 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. My political comedy sources will be Alec Baldwin as Donald Trump in the Saturday Night Live cold open last night, talking about the national emergency. And then I'll also have some Weekend Update Saturday Night Live clips, or one Saturday Night Live clip from Weekend Update, and one clip from Bill Maher's monologue on HBO's Real Time last Friday, all on my main topic, which is Trump emergency, ? And I will, of course, be committing some legal analysis using my law degrees and my knowledge of constitutional law. I will be using my Constitution, also some statutes, the National Emergencies Act, and 10 U.S.C. 2808. Those will all be coming up when we talk about whether there actually is a national emergency and whether Trump is going to lose his court fight. And then at the very end, I have a brief Adam Schiff Trump collusion update. I don't know if that's going to be a weekly thing. I did have something like that last week and this week as well, I guess. You can follow along on my clip list of my 18 clips. I just dropped my clip list, but here's my clip list. There's a link down in the video description to the clip list. You can kind of tell from my somewhat cryptic notes who's talking in the clip and what the topic of the clip is, sort of. And they all come other than the political comedy clips. They all come from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. And like I said, I want to start with this cold open clip of Alec Baldwin as Donald Trump. I actually think his impression is getting better, and I especially like this one joke. I'm only going to show you 44 seconds of it, but if you want to know why this is, some people wonder what's the political relevance of Saturday Night Live. Well, here is a tweet from the president this morning. You can see at 4:52 a.m. this morning, he was, "Nothing funny about tired Saturday Night Live on fake news NBC. Question is, how do the networks get away with these total Republican hit jobs without retribution? Likewise for many other shows? Very unfair and should be looked into. This is the real collusion." I really have no idea what that was about, but he seems to watch Saturday Night Live, even though he seems to supposedly hate it so much, and that is, I guess, the reason for that outrage from the president is the cold open and some of the other jokes from Saturday Night Live, and I will talk about that a little more with you after we watch 44 seconds from the cold open last night together over here.
So I'm basically taking military money so I can Haswall. So I'm going to sign these papers for emergency, and then I'll immediately be sued, and the ruling will not go in my favor, and then I'll end up in the Supreme Court, and then I'll call my buddy Kavanaugh, and I'll say it's time to repay the Donnie, and he'll say, "New phone, who dis?" But then the Mueller report will be released, crumbling my house of cards, and I can just plead insanity and do a few months in the puzzle factory. And my personal hell of playing president will finally be over.
And what I especially like about that 44-second clip is at the end there, it's sort of like a double entendre joke. There's some irony that, because I guess in some ways there's been a lot of reporting that Donald Trump didn't really want to be president, and he's kind of playing the president, and so that's the main joke there, that Donald Trump is saying in this parody that his long hell nightmare of being playing the president will be over, but it's actually Alec Baldwin also talking about his long nightmare of having to play the president being over. That's why, I don't know, I think that's why the applause sort of rose as people were getting the double joke, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. One thing I liked about the Saturday Night Live Weekend Update news summary is it's the only news summary where they showed that whole actual sing-song thing that Trump did in his news conference that you saw Alec Baldwin parodying there, where he talked about what's going to happen with his national emergency declaration, how it's going to go through the courts. And like I said, I will be doing some legal analysis on that and talking about what's going to happen through the courts and, what the legal issues are. But that was covered a little bit here on Saturday Night Live with the national emergency. Both Colin, Jost, and Michael Che had some good jokes, I thought, which I will discuss with you. And like I said, this is a little bit longer. It's almost 2.5 minutes because a long section of it is actually a clip from the Trump news conference where he does what you just saw Alec Baldwin parodying. And I will discuss that with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
President Trump declared a national emergency yesterday and said we need a wall to stop the flow of drugs into our country. And to demonstrate how bad the drug problem is, Trump spent 20 minutes doing his impression of a coke addict.
It's all a big lie. It's a big con game. I don't know what to do with all the money they're giving us. It's crazy. $8 billion or $2 billion or $1.5 billion. It's going to build a lot of wall. We give death penalty, fire and fury, total annihilation, the Nobel Peace Prize. I'll probably never get it, but that's okay. They gave it to Obama, so that's the story.
And what a beautiful story it was. Trump then described in a sing-song voice how his declaration will face a lengthy legal challenge before he can actually act on it, saying this.
And we will have a national emergency, and we will then be sued, and they will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there. And we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get a fair shake, and we'll win in the Supreme Court, just like the ban.
Oh my God, that guy controls our nuclear weapons. Watching that, it was like if Schoolhouse Rock had a stroke. By the way, you know what an actual national emergency is? The climate change that let the president give an outdoor press conference in the middle of February. Thank you, three people.
I'm so tired of telling Donald Trump jokes. We've been making fun of this dude and his dumbass wall for so long. I gotta be honest now, I kind of want to see the wall. I mean, I've never seen anybody so confident of such a bad idea. It's almost charming, like when Colin thought he could pull off cornrows. I'm not saying that we should let him build the wall, but what if we just let him, do a PowerPoint presentation or a dramatic reenactment? I just want to see exactly what Trump thinks is going to happen when a Mexican cartel sees a wall. What do you think they're going to just shake their fists and walk home? You know how motivated you got to be to sell drugs? I know a guy that swallowed a bag of dope, pooped it out, washed it off, and then still sold it. You can't build a wall to stop that kind of encouragement, man.
And I don't know, that last joke from Colin, from Michael Che was a little bit graphic, but does show the persistence of people who want to smuggle drugs, and a wall is not necessarily going to be a permanent barrier for depending on where it is, and that's an issue that I do have a clip on later from Republican from Texas, Will Hurd, who seems like the only reasonable Republican. If you're following along on your clip list, the Will Hurd clip is clip 15, but I did want to show one more political comedy clip here, clip 3, which is Bill Maher's take. And one thing before I get to Bill Maher, the one other thing I like about Weekend Update, well, a couple things. I like that Schoolhouse Rock joke as a big Schoolhouse Rock fan. That was, I thought, particularly funny. I thought a lot of Saturday Night Live was well written this week. I criticized it a lot of weeks. They had 2 fake ads, one on this whole doggy costume thing, and another one on a parody of a anti-cockroach spray. I thought both of those were really good. I think that's when a lot of times Saturday Night Live is at its best, and those were both pre-filmed or whatever. And some of their live stuff sometimes doesn't always work out, but the pre-film stuff is usually the best. But so I wanted to mention that about that clip. And the one other thing about that clip is, as I kind of said before I showed it, that not only had the whole sing-song thing that Trump did, but I think that was like the most extensive coverage of his press conference, more extensive coverage than any of the news summaries I'm going to show you from the big five corporate outlets. Well, four. CBS didn't do a news summary as usual, but the other four corporate outlets did news summaries with not as much video from this crazy press conference. There was that joke in there after the sing-song thing where Colin Jost said, "Oh my God, this guy has control of nuclear weapons." And I actually think that not the nuclear weapons thing. Usually just like I'll be watching something like that press conference or so many things in the last couple of years, and I'll just be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this guy is president." But he's still president probably for at least 2 more years. Like I said, we'll have the Adam Schiff collusion update at the end where there has been some Roger Stone like direct connection to Russians through WikiLeaks that have come up that make it even more possible that Trump won't make it through the end of this term, but I'll talk about that at the end. But like I said, the next clip is HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, a couple monologue jokes where I'm trying to, I guess the theme of the political comedy this week is ways in which the political comedy was better than the news, but in this one, I think Bill Maher does a pretty good job of putting some of the events of this week into a greater context more than the news summaries, especially in terms of how Trump is a bad negotiator and the shutdown, the fact that we had this shutdown and almost had a shutdown again, that wasn't really covered on the big five corporate outlets, but it comes up in this 1:45 monologue clip. And as usual, the entire monologue is available free on YouTube on HBO's real-time channel on YouTube at a link I've put down in the video description. Here's the 1:45 I wanted to share with you and talk with you about after we watch together here.
Just to refresh your memory why we're in this little bit of a pickle. We had a government shutdown, remember that? Over the wall. And now we're having a national emergency declared over a wall because the master negotiator was offered $25 billion for his wall some time ago. Turn that down. In December, he was offered $1.6 billion. Turned that down. Now they signed a deal for $1.3 billion. Today, Mexico said, fuck, if it gets any lower, maybe we will pay for it. and Trump promised his supporters over 1,000 miles, a big, beautiful wall. He got 55 miles of a fence. And did you see this? They have changed the slogan from build the wall to finish the wall. Because he told them, he said, I've already built a wall, he's built no wall. But he tells them that, and they changed the slogan. Monday is President's Day. We've gone from I cannot tell a lie to I cannot tell when I'm lying. And this thing about just telling the people you've done it. I know we're not supposed to say they're stupid. But Ann Coulter is saying that about them. I mean, are we really at the point now where we can just change reality by changing the chant? I mean, it's like if Queen sang, "We did rock you." Oh, yes, we did. We have already rocked you. I don't know if... I mean, it's madness.
No, it's not madness. It was Queen, right? His joke, the last joke there was about Queen. Actually, I like that Queen joke. I just watched Bohemian Rhapsody for the first time. I still have a Netflix DVD subscription, and it finally became available on Netflix DVD. And so I like that Queen joke. I talked about how Bill Maher did a good job of providing context, that wasn't even so much in the news summaries. And one thing he mentioned there that didn't appear in any of the news summaries except for the Fox News summary was the Ann Coulter reference. Ann Coulter actually made a pretty good joke where she said the only national emergency is the fact that we have a president who's an idiot. That actually will show up in the Fox News summary, which was fairly fair and balanced in a real sense, not in the Fox News sense. But that's going to be the fourth of the four news summaries I'm going to show you. I'm going to start with NBC News' Meet the Press. Chuck Todd, as usual, does the longest of the news summaries with his live introduction going to the package. This is clip number 4, if you're following along on your clip list, where he talks about the national emergency as really being a political emergency, and whether Trump is a leader, is he being led by his base, and it talks about the whole, like, the package also shows, that's the live introduction, then it goes to the package that shows some of this whole, like, sing-song. It's gonna go to the Ninth Circuit, and we'll probably get a bad ruling, and that's all in here. And anyway, it's not actually the best news summary. I actually think the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary from Martha Raddatz that I'm going to show next is a little better, but that's only 2.5 minutes. This is 4 minutes long, and definitely worth watching. Lots of details, which I will discuss with you after we watch it together over here.
President Trump declared a national emergency on Friday. It revealed another emergency for the president, much closer to home, his own. It's a political emergency and one of his own making. Mr. Trump has united Democrats against him, divided Republicans, and set up a court battle even he suggests he could lose. Mr. Trump even seemed to admit that the emergency is more about protecting his base than stopping illegal immigration when he said he didn't need to declare an emergency. He just wanted to build his wall faster. At the same time, our two political parties are facing national emergencies of their own. You have a Democratic Party that outpolled Republicans in 6 of the last 7 presidential elections by winning back centrist voters. It now finds itself, though, challenged by an emerging progressive wing that is eager to push the party sharply to the left. And a Republican Party once defined by free trade, strict constitutional principles, and at least the appearance of caring about the national debt, has now tethered itself to a president who mocks all of those traditional conservative norms. Mr. Trump, meanwhile, has tethered himself to his base, which he sees as critical to any re-election chances. But what is emerging is a picture of a president who refuses to even lead his base and instead is admitting he's being led by it.
We will have a national emergency, and we will then be sued.
President Trump, after the biggest legislative defeat of his presidency, announcing he will bypass Congress and divert billions of dollars from military construction projects and counter narcotics for his border wall.
They will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there. And we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get a fair shake, and we'll win in the Supreme Court.
With illegal border apprehensions down 76% from a high in 2000, the president appeared to undercut the urgency of his own argument.
I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster.
Mr. Trump himself railed against President Obama for using his executive authority to, quote, subvert the Constitution of the U.S. for his own benefit and because he is unable to negotiate with Congress.
The whole concept of executive order, it's not the way the country's supposed to be run. You're supposed to go through Congress and make a deal.
Now, some Senate Republicans are calling the move extra-constitutional, unwise, a bad idea, a rabbit hole, and a mistake.
This is not what the National Emergencies Act was intended to be used for.
What about if somebody else thinks that climate change is the national emergency, and then what will they do and how far will they go?
But it's not clear how many Republicans will actually vote to disapprove of his emergency declaration. Just 2 weeks ago,
national emergencies that have been issued in the past have not been contentious. I'm pretty sure that this one would be.
But now,
I'm going to support the national emergency declaration.
You're watching Mitch McConnell eat a manure sandwich in this whole process.
Democrats have their own challenges as the center of gravity in the party shifts leftward, and Republicans dust off an old line of attack.
That's called socialism.
Socialism is on trial.
On Thursday, Amazon announced it was abandoning plans to build a new corporate campus in New York City after protests from progressives.
I think it's incredible. I mean, it shows that everyday Americans still have the power to organize and fight for their communities and they can have more say in this country than the richest man in the world.
New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is calling Amazon's decision disappointing and disrespectful, but he's also taking on fellow progressives.
I'll take on any progressive anywhere that thinks it's a good idea to lose jobs and revenue, because I think that's out of touch with what working people want.
Earlier, I caught up with Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. He's attending the annual gathering of world leaders.
Oh, and I let that keep playing because both in like the teaser right at the beginning of Meet the Press, before, Dennis Haspert comes on and says, if the longest running show in television history, it's Meet the Press. And then Chuck Todd does the intro that you just saw. Before that, Chuck Todd said, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. And then he said it again right there, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. For some reason, he really loves saying Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. So I had to include the very end of that clip. I pretty much told you what was good about that clip before I showed it. The one thing I forgot to mention was that they actually compared it to the hypocritical Trump attack on Obama for his executive overreach that was also in kind of like a sing-song voice. I don't know. I guess that's something Trump does. It just seemed extra weird when he did it during the news conference this week. But anyway, I want to move on to what I had said was the best of the news summaries. This is Martha Raddatz doing just a severe fact check on Trump's national emergency declaration from several different directions. It's more compact than the last news summary you saw, which was, like I said, 4 minutes, 2 seconds. This is 2 minutes and 33 seconds from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, with the co-host Martha Raddatz giving you the news summary that I will talk about with you after we watch together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. You are looking live at the U.S.-Mexico border in Texas, a small portion of the nearly 2,000-mile stretch of land where President Trump has declared a national emergency, saying there's, quote, an invasion of our country. The president's plan is already being challenged on Capitol Hill and in the courts. It calls for about $6.5 billion from the Pentagon and Treasury Department budgets to fund the construction of Trump's wall, a wall he promised Mexico would pay for. Trump is claiming the wall will guard against an invasion of drugs, but a recent assessment from the Drug Enforcement Administration says the majority of heroin comes through legal ports of entry, which would not be stopped by a wall. Then there's the president's claim that criminals and gang members are flooding across the border. But Customs and Border Protection statistics tell a different story. Of the hundreds of thousands of people they have encountered, only about 4% have been convicted of a crime, and only 0.1% of the undocumented immigrants are affiliated with gangs. And finally, there's the idea of an invasion itself.
We have far more people trying to get into our country today than probably we've ever had before. And we've done an incredible job in stopping them, but it's a massive number of people. If we had the wall, it would be very easy.
According to CBP, illegal immigration has actually declined dramatically over the last 2 decades. And while there has been a recent surge of migrants from Central America, it's made up mostly of families seeking asylum. 9 members of Congress represent districts along the southern border, 8 Democrats and 1 Republican. None support the president's declaration. In Congress, Democrats are preparing a resolution to revoke his emergency declaration, and a growing number of Republicans are breaking rank. Senator Marco Rubio saying no crisis justifies violating the Constitution. And then there are the courts, where Trump is already facing legal challenges. So where do we go from here? For more on the 2 paths that could block the president's declaration, I'm joined by ABC's senior congressional correspondent Mary Bruce and senior national correspondent Terry Moran, who...
So those are the ABC commentators who are going to tell you about the congressional and legal challenges to the national emergency. I didn't include any of their clips because I'm going to give you my own commentary. But like I said, I thought Martha Raddatz did a great job of fact-checking in that news summary, probably the most rigorous of all the fact-checking. And the one thing I forgot to mention was they started off with like visual fact-checking with live video from various points on the border where there's no invasion, there's no national emergency. That, I mean, of all the types of fact-checking you can do, I think ABC did a great job with just the very beginning of that clip, which I forgot to mention. So thank you, ABC, for that. I also wanted to show you two more of... Oh, you know, Martha Raddatz also seemed to be of all the hosts on the corporate outlets, the ones who understood the legal issues the most. And you'll see that in the couple additional clips I'm going to show from the newsmakers from ABC. Let's see, that's when in clip 11, when Martha Raddatz talks to Jim Jordan and points out his total hypocrisy as a Freedom Forum, limited government, you know, the stop presidential overreach Republican, and then all of a sudden he's like totally fine with the president declaring a national emergency for money that Congress wouldn't appropriate. So that's an ABC clip too. And then clip 14 actually shows Martha Raddatz highlights in her interview with Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth the way that this national emergency might actually hurt Trump with his own base because of where he's taking the money from. And I'll talk about that later. But I have two more news summaries I want to show you. The next one is CNN's State of the Union. Jake Tapper, not there this week. Dana Bash was filling in for Jake Tapper. The State of the Union is facing a constitutional showdown, which I believe is accurate, not so much a constitutional crisis, which you'll see in the Fox News one that's coming up. And the one thing I like about this CNN news summary, it also does some really good fact-checking, but it juxtaposes the Trump national emergency with the Trump golf weekend over this. Trump has been playing golf right after declaring a national emergency, which I believe CNN is the best at highlighting over in this clip.
In for Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is facing a constitutional showdown. President Trump is at his golf resort in Florida this weekend after declaring a national emergency on Friday in order to secure funding for a wall along the southern border. It's intended to bypass Congress and allow the president to redirect billions of federal dollars toward the wall. The move is already facing challenges in the courts, and Democrats are vowing to try to stop the president legislatively. Some Republicans are also criticizing the tactic. Senator Marco Rubio said, quote, "No crisis justifies violating the Constitution." And just like he did in 2016, President Trump is making the wall a central part of his 2020 re-election campaign. He held a rally this past week in El Paso, Texas, and displayed signs reading, "Finish that wall," even though no new wall has been built. Democrats, for their part, they're on the campaign trail pushing back on the national emergency declaration, calling it manufactured and inappropriate. And as President Trump hones his 2020 strategy, some in the Democratic Party are looking to a candidate who hasn't decided yet whether to run. And that potential candidate, is Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown, a longtime progressive and proud populist. And he joins me now from his home state of Ohio.
And I don't have any clips of Sherrod Brown, and I kept it playing a little too long there to just show you that's a running criticism I have of the media, that they tend to highlight the importance of news stories that involve guests that they've gotten exclusively. So, at the end of the news summary there, CNN's Dana Bash says, and one of the very important candidates who might be running for president is Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown. And I don't know, that's a little bit of hype, but that's one of the actual biases from the corporate news media, sensationalism. That's not the most extreme example, but it is a little bit sensationalistic to focus on news just because you have an exclusive interview. And the final news summary I want to show you is the Fox News Sunday news summary, which, like I said earlier in the program, is more fair and balanced than usual. And you'll see Chris Wallace do some actual good cross-examination of Stephen Miller in the this is the clip after next. The Stephen Miller, you may remember last time I had a Stephen Miller clip on my Sunday live clip roundup. He made a very unfortunate hairspray choice, which he did not repeat on his Fox News Sunday appearance this morning, so you don't have to worry about like weird dripping stuff on the side of his head. But this news summary doesn't have the severe fact-checking of the previous couple that I showed, but it is fairly balanced, I think, on the issue of whether the national emergency is presidential overreach, and I think it covers that pretty well. It does talk about a constitutional crisis where, I mean, the fact that this is going to be challenged in the courts, that's not quite the crisis that, like, when the Mueller report comes out, that's going to be the constitutional crisis, not this thing. So that's one of my criticisms, and one of my praises I mentioned earlier is that there's an actual quote of Ann Coulter calling the president an idiot, which you don't hear a lot on, you know, the Trump TV, Fox News, but you do hear it from Kevin Corke reporting on Chris Wallace's Fox News Sunday this morning over here.
From Fox News in Washington. Congress used the power of the purse to deny President Trump all the money he wants to build a wall on the southern border. So the president invoked executive powers to free up billions of dollars to do it anyway. The president says there's a crisis at the border, but critics, including some Republicans, say the president's move has created a crisis of its own. In a moment, we'll speak with White House senior policy advisor Stephen Miller. But first, let's get the latest from Kevin Corke at the White House. Kevin.
Chris, the president may have avoided another shutdown fight by signing off on a funding bill, but his use of executive power will very likely create a new battle in the courts.
We have tremendous amounts of drugs flowing into our country, much of it coming from the southern border. I'm going to be signing a national emergency.
In laying out the reasoning for declaring a national emergency, President Trump lit a political fuse, reigniting a separation of powers debate and setting the stage for a possible constitutional crisis. At issue, border wall funding, illegal immigration, and the use of power given to the president by Congress. But criticism has come from both the left and the right, with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Speaker Nancy Pelosi issuing a statement calling the president's declaration unlawful over a crisis that does not exist. Meanwhile, Trump loyalists howled because they believe the president signed off on a funding bill that restricts much of what and where a wall could be built, accusing Mr. Trump of setting off an illegal immigration stimulus.
The only national emergency is that our president is an idiot.
Chris, if the White House spends the money sequentially as they currently plan to do, they would spend over $5 billion before any emergency funds are tapped. That's money to get moving, if you will, while this battle makes its way through the courts. Chris?
Kevin Corke reporting from the White House. Kevin, thanks for that. And
so, as I pretty much gave my commentary on that Fox News clip before I showed it, it was fairly fair and balanced. I had a couple criticisms that I mentioned. Now I'm going to move on to the newsmaker summaries, the newsmaker clips, not the news summaries that I just finished showing you, because like I said, that's 4 of the 5 corporate outlets. CBS's Face the Nation didn't have a news summary unless you count that little like topic or that little program summary that comes before the host actually comes on screen. Margaret Brennan did a little one of those that I'm not going to show you, and then she went straight to her interview with Lindsey Graham, and I'll have a clip of Lindsey Graham coming up I have 2 clips before that. That's clip 10, but I'm about to show you clip 8, and this has to do with whether the national emergency declaration by Donald Trump is unconstitutional and or illegal. And I saw, I always read the live comments during the clips as best I can. And I saw this one from, I think that's Derek. Back at 6:46 p.m., Derek 11 asked if I thought the Supreme Court was going to overrule the Trump national emergency, find it unconstitutional or illegal or whatever. And actually, I think it's kind of murky. I've read the statutes. I haven't really read the cases that much, although, I know about the Youngstown versus Ohio case that I'll talk about a little bit more in a few minutes. But I don't think it's like a slam dunk against Trump, as some people seem to think. But I'm a little bit wary of giving that opinion. Like I said, I haven't read that many cases on it yet. And one person I really trust on this, I mentioned I have some involvement with the ACLU. I'm a volunteer ACLU activist. I serve on the board of directors of the ACLU of Northern California. But when I commit legal analysis or give my opinions in this program, I'm just giving my own opinions, having nothing to do with my ACLU affiliations. And I mention all that because the next person I'm going to show is actually the director of the ACLU's National Security Project, Hina Shamsi. She was on AM Joy this morning, and the ACLU has already said they're going to sue Donald Trump for this national emergency declaration based on it being illegal and unconstitutional. And I happen to know from my work with the ACLU that the ACLU doesn't call something unconstitutional unless it is ready to sue and back it up with case law. So I give a lot of credence to what Hina Shamsi says here. I cut out like a follow-up question from Joy Reid about some stupid thing they said on Fox News, but I edited together basically the two really important pieces of legal analysis from the director of the ACLU's National Security Project, talking about why Trump's national security declaration is most likely illegal and unconstitutional. And I will talk about it a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Give us help us understand the basis for your lawsuit now. I'll just read a little bit from your executive director, Anthony Romero, who said on Friday, this is a patently illegal power grab that hurts American communities and flouts the checks and balances that are hallmarks of our democracy, and saying we'll be filing a lawsuit this week. Explain to us what standing the ACLU believes it has to be the filer of this lawsuit.
Thank you for having me, Joy. And standing is one of the things that we have carefully considered, and we'll be making more details public when we file early this week. There are two things that are key here. One is that, of course, there is no national emergency. The president admitted it in the Rose Garden. Leaders of both political parties have said so. Security experts and people living at the border have all agreed. Two, the authority that the president is claiming is illegal and unprecedented. He is, unlike any other president ever before him, invoking emergency powers to seek military construction of a border wall over congressional will. And that is a very dangerous thing. The Constitution assigns to Congress the power of the purse to decide how our taxpayer money will be spent. And that is what the president is seeking to unlawfully usurp at this point. So a number of things in context here. One is that Congress reached a bipartisan deal to fund a particular amount. The president didn't agree, and he wants something more and different. And two, I think it's important to focus also on the specific authorities that he's claiming, 10 U.S.C. 2808. That's really only ever been invoked by two presidents to support military construction needed for military overseas. This, what the president is seeking to do here, is very, very different. He is going against congressional will, seeking to build a pet project that is domestic, permanent, and simply not supported.
Domestic, permanent, simply not supported. that last 30 seconds, I think, is, to really understand the great ACLU analysis of this issue, we're going to have to wait for the filing early this week that Hina Shamsi promised there. And like I said, my personal legal analysis is just my personal opinion and a poor substitute for the great staff attorneys that work at the ACLU. But she's talking about there are two different statutes involved here. There's the General National Emergencies Act that down in the video description, I put a link to the Brennan Center page on various emergency powers given to the president, including the National Emergencies Act. So I didn't want to put all the various statutes in just for this issue, but I really recommend that Brennan Center link if you want to learn more about the actual laws that I'm about to talk about. But the National Emergencies Act gives the president the power to do a lot. Congress passed it in 1976 and gave the president all this power to do various things as long as he was using statutory authority somewhere else that Congress also gave him. And in this case, the national emergency is referring to 10 U.S.C. 2808 that Hina Shamsi talked about there, that gives the president authority to build, it's for military construction, and it even seems to involve housing. That's the way it's been used. The two times it's been used, once by George H.W. Bush for the Persian Gulf War, and then by George W. Bush right after 9/11. Only two times. And if the national emergency is going to be illegal, the best argument's going to be that it's a misuse of 10 U.S.C. 2808 for military construction. And that's possible. There's also a constitutional issue that I'll talk about a little later when I show some additional clips on this. But I don't want to talk too long between the clips. And the next clip actually talks, the only news anchor to actually bring up the other two times that 10 U.S.C. 2808 has been used, and you saw Hina Shamsi briefly reference that, but Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday actually brings them up in a fairly rigorous cross-examination of White House senior advisor Stephen Miller. Like I said last time, he had that weird spray on his head that started dripping down the side of his face and caused I hate to appearance shame people, but that was a poor fashion choice by Stephen Miller, since he's going on TV and trying to look somewhat presentable. But he's really Chris Wallace does a pretty good job of cross-examining him on the national emergency situation. If you have your Constitution available, this starts off with a reference to Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7, that says that basically all government appropriations have to come from Congress. And then you'll see Chris Wallace is all prepared with the two times that military construction national emergencies have been invoked in the past. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that 4-minute, 1-second Fox News Sunday clip together over here.
In any case, let's talk about the constitutional aspects of this, because I've talked to you over the years. I know that you are a constitutional conservative, and you believe the Constitution should be interpreted as written, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Here's Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 of the Constitution as written. No money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. Isn't what President Trump wants to do a clear violation of what the founders, of what James Madison talked about as giving Congress the power of the purse?
No, because Congress in 1976 passed the National Emergencies Act and gave the president the authority as a result of that, to invoke a national emergency in many different circumstances, but among them for the use of military construction funds. And that was the point I was making earlier, is that if the president were to say we're going to use military construction funds to say increase the perimeter around a base in Bagram, around a base in Syria, nobody would even say anything about it. We have 4,000 troops on the border right now, and as a result of that mission, they need to secure those areas where they're patrolling.
But let's talk about national emergencies. National emergencies have been declared 59 times since 1976 when the law was passed, the National Emergencies Act. Can you point to a single instance, even one, where the president asked Congress for money, Congress refused to give him that money, and the president then invoked national emergency powers to get the money?
Well, first of all,
can you find out one case?
I think what you're missing, Chris, is that the national emergencies don't all have the same authorities and the same justification.
I understand that, but there have been 59. Can you find one case like that?
This authority specifically refers to the use of military construction funds. Other emergencies, for example, were declared to promote.
I mean, if you want to talk about military constructions, do you know how many times military construction has been invoked as a national emergency?
That one was in
twice.
Right.
Twice. Once by George H.W. Bush during the middle of the Gulf War, and the second time by George W. Bush right after 9/11.
Chris,
this is hardly comparable to either of those.
Can you name one foreign threat in the world today, outside this country's borders, that currently kills more Americans than the threats crossing our southern border?
You know, the joy of this is I get to ask you questions you don't get to ask me.
The answer is no.
But then answer my question. Can you name one case where a president has asked Congress for money, Congress has refused, and the president has then invoked national powers to get the money anyway?
Well, this current situation...
Just yes or no, sir?
The current situation pertains specifically to the military construction authority.
I'm just asking, has there been a single case where Congress asked for money for military construction, Congress said no, and
The meaning of the statute, Chris, is clear on its own terms. If you don't like the statute, or members of Congress don't like the statute...
Would you agree the answer is no? There hasn't been a single case like this.
But the premise of your question is also false, because Congress has appropriated money for construction of border barriers consistently. This is part of a national security mission.
But it has never done this under a national emergency where President...
We've declared national emergencies to promote democracy in Belarus, to promote democracy in Zimbabwe.
But it didn't involve taking money that Congress refused to appropriate.
They didn't refuse to appropriate it. They passed a law specifically saying the president could have this authority. It's in the plain statute. That's a decision that Congress made. And if people don't like that, they can address it. But to my point that I made, this would not be even an issue if the president was invoking that statute to support some foreign adventure overseas. You and I both know that presidents for years have engaged in one military adventure after another, not to mention the fact that we do operations to destroy drug fields in foreign lands in Afghanistan or in Colombia, and we can't even deal with the criminal cartels operating on our border.
Okay, let's talk about the
organizations are destabilizing the Western Hemisphere.
I want to move
fundamental foreign policy
respectfully. Let's talk about the logistics here. If the president gets out.
So yeah, that was really good cross-examination from Chris Wallace there of Stephen Miller, I think, and he mentioned one other issue in there that Hina Shamsi also mentioned that I forgot to point out that also makes this a difficult issue in the legal battle that's going to definitely come from the ACLU and other sources for this national emergency declaration, and that's the fact that Congress actually appropriated a certain amount of money and decided this is the amount we're going to appropriate and no more, and even put in specific prohibitions against using money for the wall. And the thing about the way courts look at statutes is they assume when Congress passes a new law that they thought about all the previous laws they passed. This is something courts do all the time. And so the new law supersedes the old law, and that could be a really important issue. Hina Shamsi mentioned it, and Chris Wallace mentioned it in his questioning of Stephen Miller there, that Congress specifically said, this is the amount we're going to authorize and no more. And then the president said, okay, I'll sign that, and then I'll spend more than you said. which that could be something that the court looks at as well. But now the next clip I want to show you is another Republican who you would think would have some scruples. In the past has stood for limited government, but he apparently has been totally co-opted by Trumpism for, I don't know the reason. You can speculate down in the comments section if you want, but this is Senator Lindsey Graham appearing on CBS's Face the Nation, talking to Margaret Brennan, totally okay with this national emergency. First, and this is also, you'll see the first reference to the military programs that are actually going to be put off into the future or maybe scrapped altogether in order to build this border wall that is not really going to be helping the security of anyone for reasons that I will discuss when I show later clips, especially the, I think, Republican Will Hurd from Texas clip talks about this. But Lindsey Graham is actually saying, no, the military appropriations that Congress has specifically designated, we shouldn't do those. We should do Trump's vanity project of building a border wall so that his 30% of his base supporters will be happy. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that 2.5-minute clip together over here.
Just declared a national emergency in regard to getting the funds for his border wall. In terms of getting those funds, though, through this emergency action, there's about $3.6 billion of it that could come from military construction efforts, including construction of a middle school in Kentucky, housing for military families, improvements for bases like Camp Pendleton and Hanscom Air Force Base. Aren't you concerned that some of these projects that were part of legislation that you helped approve in Congress are now going to possibly be cut out?
Well, the president will have to make a decision where to get the money. Let's just say for a moment that he took some money out of the military construction budget. I would say it's better for the middle school kids in Kentucky to have a secure border. We'll get them the school they need, but right now we got a national emergency on our hands. Opioid addiction is going through the roof in this country. Thousands of Americans died last year and dying this year because we can't control the flow of drugs into this country, and all of it's coming across the border. So
Through
the
ports
dangers
of entry,
presented by a
according
broken
to
border,
to
to
Customs
me,
and Border Patrol, though.
both. It's both. It's not just one. For every one we get, God knows how much we miss.
Don't you think Congress has ceded too much power to the executive branch? Do you think that you need to more sharply define what constitutes a national emergency so that future presidents can't interpret it as they like?
Good question. I think that every member of Congress has watched 3 presidents send troops to the border. Bush, Obama, now Trump. Not one of us have complained about deploying forces to the border to secure the border. It's pretty hard for me to understand the legal difference between sending troops and having them build a barrier. What disappoints me is on President Obama's watch, as a Republican, I voted for a $44 billion border security package, $9 billion of which included barriers. 2006, all of us voted for the Secure Fence Act. And we're talking about steel barriers, not a concrete wall. And unfortunately, when it comes to Trump, the Congress is locked down and will not give him what we've given past presidents. So unfortunately, he's got to do it on his own, and I support his decision to go that route.
Well, perhaps in the future we can talk about sharpening what constitutes an emergency. But before I let you go, you made a pitch from the stage.
Yeah, perhaps in the future we can talk about that. And there is a problem with the statute. I talked about that earlier. The National Emergencies Act is pretty broad. It basically gives the president the power to do all these things. All he has to do is say it's a national emergency, and it never defines what is a national emergency. It's and courts over time have said that they don't want to second guess. You know, if Congress says the president has this power and they don't really define it that well, there is this delegation issue that I'll talk about when I get to a clip a little bit later. But I'm almost done with the Republicans who are total Trumpists and totally behind the national emergency. I have two more of those. One is Representative Jim Jordan, who is very hypocritical in a way similar to Lindsey Graham, formerly having been for limited government power and against the executive authority usurped by the Obama administration. Well, Jim Jordan is one of the leaders of the Freedom Caucus who said that Obama was the, usurper in chief and the imperial president. And you'll see when he talks to Martha Raddatz on ABC's This Week, all of a sudden he has no problem with this national emergency, and he has no problem with the usurpation of the power of the purse. And you'll see here Martha Raddatz also talks about the opposition that certain Republicans have had to this incredible executive overreach from the Trump administration, which I'll talk to you about a little more after we watch that almost 5-minute long clip from ABC. And did I edit this? Oh, it's just it's all about the caravans, I guess. If you ask any question about whether it's a national emergency, I guess according to Jim Jordan, the big hypocrite, as Martha Raddatz does a pretty good job of pointing out in this next clip, according to the big hypocrite, it's all about the caravans over in this clip.
Major concern is for the president to unilaterally repurpose billions of dollars that have been designated for specific projects, undermines the appropriations process, and really is of dubious constitutionality.
Senator Susan Collins there expressing her concerns about the president's emergency declaration, one of several GOP senators to do so. Joining me now is Congressman Jim Jordan from Ohio. He's the top Republican on the House Oversight Committee. Good morning, Congressman. You heard Senator Collins there, and many members of your party are uneasy about the president's declaration. Senator Marco Rubio said no crisis justifies violating the Constitution. And here's what Senator Tom Tillis wrote. It doesn't matter who the president is or what party they belong to. I strongly believe in the separation of powers and curbing the kind of executive overreach that Congress has allowed to fester for the better part of the last century. Isn't that the sort of principle on limiting executive power that the Freedom Caucus, which you founded, should stand for?
Martha, this is an emergency. I mean, what are we on now? The fifth caravan? So I would just ask those senators, how many caravans do we need? 6, 7, or just an endless caravan, the one that never stops? What did we have just a few weeks ago? A drug bust that was enough fentanyl to kill 57 million Americans. What do we need? 58 million, 59 million Americans, enough fentanyl to kill that many? So you tell me, I think it's an emergency. What I also think is interesting is those Republicans who are criticizing the president for wanting to do this executive order are the same kind of Republicans who just a year ago didn't want us to debate and push for the wall funding when we had the majority in both the House and the Senate. Back after Chuck Schumer had shut down the government because he said amnesty was more important than funding the government, and we had the big omnibus spending bill. That's when we should have done this. So I think it's kind of interesting. Those same Republicans who were against fighting for it back then are the same ones who are criticizing the president now for his executive order.
Congressman, can you give me an example where a president asked for something Congress rejected and the president went ahead and said he would do it anyway?
I don't know of that, but I do know that this wasn't a rejection because there was some money for the wall in this bill. So Congress said it's okay for some, but the president said this is such a grave problem. I need more money to build more wall and to fulfill the campaign promise that I told the American people I was going to do.
Which is what Congress which Congress specifically rejected more money.
Congress didn't. They rejected more money, but they gave some for it. The point is there is money that he can use that doesn't require an executive order. He's going to use that. Then he's also going to do the emergency declaration. It'll go to court, Martha, and we'll see what the court says. All I know is this is a serious situation. This is a crisis. Look at the drug problem, the human trafficking problem, the gang violence problem. That's why we need the border security wall, and that's what the president is committed to making sure happens.
Okay, you say this is an emergency. The president says this is an emergency, but illegal border crossings, as we have said on this program, are near a 40-year low. The DEA recently said the majority of heroin from across the southern border comes from legal ports of entry, as did the fentanyl bust you just talked about. That was in Arizona. Don't the figures...
So you don't think drugs are coming across where there aren't Border Patrol agents? They're only trying to get drugs through where there are agents to stop it? Come on, that defies common sense.
I am reading government statistics here, Congressman. So don't these figures undermine the claim that this is an emergency? There is no doubt drugs are coming over. There is no doubt illegals are coming over. But you just heard that they are the low of 40 years.
Everyone knows a wall will help. In fact, Democrats knew it, and Democrats were for it. Then Senator Clinton said we need a border security wall. Then Senator Obama said we need money for a barrier on our border. What's amazing to me now, what I think is dangerous, is the positions that the left and the Democrats are now taking. Congressman Blumenauer said abolish ICE. Nancy Pelosi said walls are immoral. You had the candidate for president, Secretary Clinton, say we need a borderless hemisphere. And oh, by the way, the person that the Democrats had do the State of the Union response, Stacey Abrams, just 4 weeks ago said non-citizens should be able to vote. Those are the positions that scare me. But what is common sense is build a border security wall and help us deal with this drug problem, this gang violence problem, and this human trafficking problem. That is just good common sense, and we know it will help. That's why the president's for it. That's why I'm for it.
And Congressman...
I don't know what that attack on Stacey Abrams was at the end there, that, non-citizens should be able to vote. Well, if you want to go back to our founding principles, back when the Constitution was ratified, guess what? Non-citizens could vote all the way up until the passage of the Alien and Seditions Act. So, which was what? Was that 1801, 1802? So, aliens could vote, and we had open borders for a lot longer than that. So, Jim Jordan, I think Martha Raddatz did a really good job of pointing out the hypocrisy of the co-founder of the House Freedom Caucus there, having no problem with his presidential overreach, and he even got tripped up there with Congress appropriated, they decided to spend the money, they just didn't want to spend more, or they refused, Congress obviously decided to spend a certain amount and no more than that amount, and that is already a congressional disapproval, which also there will, under the National Emergencies Act, there will probably be a congressional disapproval, almost definitely passed by the House and probably passed by the Senate, that the president can then veto, and probably won't be overridden. There's probably not a veto-proof majority, but that's a whole other congressional action. But I'm almost done with the Republicans who are rabidly pro-Trump. I actually only have one more, and then there's Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Chuck Todd loved to say Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Well, I'm going to show his clip, but he's actually in a swing state. Scott Walker, Wisconsin just went blue in the 2018 midterms. And so Ron Johnson of Wisconsin is actually not a rabid pro-Trump ideologue, which is what you've seen from the last few clips, and what you're also going to see from Rush Limbaugh. This is the one Rush Limbaugh clip I'm going to inflict on you. Rush Limbaugh does his annual interview with Chris Wallace, where I include the introduction where Chris Wallace kisses up to Rush Limbaugh, and there's this one point where he says, Rush and I have an agreement where I can interrupt him, because he's like, "Oh, Rush, don't send your social media trolls to attack me. I think that's what Chris Wallace is afraid of. And what's interesting about Rush Limbaugh's justification of the national emergency is he's not even trying to justify it, through the Constitution. He's just saying, I like it when it's to do things that I agree with. I just don't like it when it's to do things I disagree with, which is almost entirely the ends justify the means argument that I've always opposed as, utilitarianism run amok. I'm much more of a deontologist, if you even know what that means. But the other thing about this Rush Limbaugh clip is, it's not only the end justifies the means, but it's also the end is actually Trump winning, us winning. It's not like some great, moral imperative. And if there is any great moral imperative, it's really white supremacy. If you listen closely, this is really tinged with white supremacy, keeping, the America, the historical America, our civilization, you'll hear the tinges of white supremacy, but a lot of ends justify the means, and the ends are really just Trump winning over in the 4-minute, 19-second interview. There's a little bit of cross-examination from Chris Wallace here about, you're a constitutional conservative and this is executive overreach, but there's a lot of stuff in here that is not fact-checked, and certainly not the white supremacy that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch that Fox News Sunday clip together over here.
He is the most listened to talk show host in America, who this week said the budget deal Congress handed the president was an outrage by both parties. Rush Limbaugh joins us live from his EIB studio in Florida. Rush, welcome back to Fox News Sunday. We're delighted to have you for your annual visit.
Yeah, and it's great to be back, Chris. Thank you very much for having me, as always.
All right. So I know that you are a constitutional conservative and originalist. Do you really have no problem with President Trump declaring a national emergency and taking money that Congress refused to give him?
No, I don't. I just listened to your panel, and I think so many, it's all minutia. All you guys were talking about was minutia. Katie Pavlich had it right. We have an emergency. This is an invasion. The very existence and definition of American culture, American society, the rule of law. Why does nobody talk about the fact that millions and millions and millions of people are breaking the law coming here illegally, and that the Democrat Party wants that to happen? We can't have the breakdown of rule of law and law and order this way. That alone would suggest that this has gone on way too long and needs to stop it. The argument about where drugs come into the country, can anybody deny that they're coming in and it needs to be stopped and it's destroying future generations of the country? We're so caught up in the game of how Washington debates issues. Is this a fact? Is that not a fact? It is undeniable that we have a major immigration problem and a political party that needs a permanent underclass of voters that wants that parade of illegal people who are uneducated, don't even speak the language. They want them here.
All right. And you and I have this agreement that I can interrupt you so I can keep things moving, because as Donald Trump said, you can go for 3 hours. All right. But I want to ask you about the game that you say we play in Washington, because the fact is that when President Obama took executive actions, you were outraged. And as you would expect, I've got a couple of examples of Rush Limbaugh over the years. Let's put them on the screen. In June of 2012, when President Obama deferred action against the Dreamers, you said this: 40 years ago, Richard Nixon was hounded out of office, supposedly for his illegal actions. And I'm telling you that whatever Nixon did pales in comparison to just this move by Obama today. In November of 2014, on reports that Mr. Obama was going to protect millions of parents of Dreamers, you said this: we can't just stand idly by and try to find some political opportunity while the president basically shreds the Constitution and flushes it down the toilet. So here's my question, Rush. I understand that you like what President Trump is doing and you didn't like what President Obama was doing. But that's the concern here, is that to the degree that you give the president more and more powers, yes, you're going to get some things, executive powers from one president you like, but you're going to get things, executive powers from another president that you don't like.
You may look at it that way. I don't. I look at it right and wrong. And what Obama was doing was furthering this existing problem. He was politicizing this, using whatever executive powers he wanted to use. Yes, I objected to that, but primarily because of what he was doing with these executive powers. He was taking action that I deemed to be harmful to the country. I look at what Trump is doing as something he has to do because he's not getting any cooperation whatsoever. Both parties, Chris, let's be honest here, both parties have people that are still trying to get rid of Donald Trump. I read this bill, this spending bill. This bill is outrageous. The things, welcoming centers for newly arriving illegal aliens and all kinds of medical care for. The purpose of this bill, I think, was to eventually be used by the Democrats and some Republicans to tell the American people, see, electing Trump was pointless, worthless. He can't protect you. He can't stop us. He can't do what he said he was going to do because we hate him so much, we're not going to allow him to do it. That's what this bill is. So to me, all of this boils down to where the heck are we going as a country and what kind of country are we going to have? And if anybody is willing to go to the limit to make this country remain as founded, they're going to have my support.
All right. President Trump talked.
What kind of country are we going to have, and is it going to remain as founded? And I think there were other definite references in that Rush Limbaugh answer to, like I said, white supremacy, keeping America white, keeping the brown people out, and the clearest of all the Republican clips that I just showed. And also, it was very much in an argument in terms of getting rid of all principles and saying that the ends justify the means, and the actual end is just Trump winning. And that was the thing that Limbaugh was most outraged about there, that this whole bill was really, it was a setup to make Trump look like a loser when, and to his base, when the 2020 election comes up with the, what do you call them? Illegal alien welcoming centers, or I don't know. That sounds almost like the death panels from Obamacare to me, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I apologize that I showed you 4 minutes, 19 seconds of Fox News Sunday interview, the Fox News Sunday interview with Rush Limbaugh. That, you know, I try not, there was a time when I actually listened to a lot of Rush Limbaugh back when I lived in St. Louis. You know, Rush Limbaugh is originally from Cape Girardeau, and there's a federal judge in St. Louis where I practiced law, who is Rush Limbaugh's brother, I think, David Limbaugh. And so there was, I spent a lot more time trying, and Rush Limbaugh was I think he peaked a long time ago as an influence nationally, but he is a significant influence on the president, apparently, and that was also covered in the Fox News Sunday interview and clips I'm not showing you. But the next clip I want to show you is, well, there are two more Republicans, but this is the last Republican who actually in some way tries to justify what Trump is doing. This is Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, and he is, a couple later guests on Meet the Press said he was like doing backflips or calisthenics or twisting, or this is a very difficult answer for him because he's not from a solid red state. He's from Wisconsin, where the governor just, Scott Walker, the Republican governor, just lost in the 2018 election. Trump narrowly won Wisconsin, but then it went blue in 2018. And I think that is very apparent in the way Ron Johnson tries to like split hairs and take both sides. And in his answer about, he's really concerned about the national emergency issue, but he's still supporting Trump, you know, for the Trump base. In this Meet the Press clip with, I think, pretty good questioning from Chuck Todd that I'll talk about with you after we watch that clip together over here.
The president's declaration of a national emergency, I'm aware there have been dozens of them since the law was passed in 1976. But by our research and reading and our understanding, this is the first national emergency that has attempted to spend money that Congress specifically said no to. How is that not presidential overreach?
Well, I think your research is probably correct. I think many of us are concerned about this. I think past Congresses have given any executive, any administration way too much power, and this would be another expansion of that power. That's why you see an awful lot of us concerned about this. Now, the better way to solve this problem would be for Democrats to support what they supported in the past and give this president funding for better barriers, which we need. We need to secure our border. We need to fix our horribly broken legal and illegal immigration system. And so, hopefully after this impasse now is over in terms of funding the government, we can sit down on a bipartisan basis and start solving these problems and fix our systems.
Well, is the president's move unconstitutional in your view?
No, I don't think so. Again, it's certainly an expansion of authority Congress has given past presidents. This president has the same authority. I wish he wouldn't use it in this case. But again, I understand his frustration.
Where does he have the authority?
Democrats
where does he have the authority on this?
What he wants to do.
Where do you believe he has the authority in the Constitution on this?
From what I can see, it probably comes from a number of different pieces of legislation, the National Emergency Act. There are other pockets of money that give him the authority, for example, in the Department of Defense to fight drugs. I mean, obviously, putting up better barriers is part of the effort to combat that flow of heroin, for example, that's poisoning our cities. So, no, listen, this is a real problem, and it's way more than just a policy crisis. It is a humanitarian crisis. President Obama called that a humanitarian crisis 2014. We're at that level just a third into the year.
So you believe his use of the National Emergency Act, I want to clarify this, is constitutional. You believe it will be upheld in the courts. Do you want the courts to uphold this power?
Listen, I regret that past Congresses have given the president, any president, a lot of the Congress's constitutional authority. It's done it on tariffs. It's done in this case. It's done in many cases. We should have three co-equal branches. Right now, the presidency is probably the most powerful, and then the courts. And Congress is really diminished. And we should start taking back that congressional authority. It'd return that balance. But that's the way it is. And again, particularly when Congress has given the president authority, it's really when that president's authority is even stronger than just what's written in the Constitution.
Are you going to vote to disapprove of the president's use of this of the National Emergency Act when it comes to the Senate? The House is likely to vote on a resolution of disapproval. It will come to the Senate. Where would you vote on that?
I'm going to take a look at the case the president makes. And I'm also going to take a look at how quickly this money is actually going to be spent versus what he's going to use. If he's not going to be spending it this fiscal year or very early in the next fiscal year, I would have my doubts. So again, I'm going to take a look at it, and I'll decide when I actually have to vote on it.
So yeah, that's Ron Johnson from Wisconsin doing backflips, calisthenics, whatever, to try to both say that he's worried about the National Emergencies Act giving too much power to the president, but he's also supportive of this national emergency declared by this particular president, Donald Trump. You can let me know what you think about that down in the comment section. I'm going to get to some of the Democratic reaction, although there is one Republican in here. I mentioned earlier Will Hurd, the Texas Republican, the only Republican in Texas, the only Republican in Congress who has actual Mexican border in his district. There are, I think, 7 or 8 Democrats and one Republican who has the border in the district, and that's Will Hurd. That's the other Republican I'm going to show you. But before I get to that, I have one Democrat. This is over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, Tammy Duckworth, who in one of her answers talking to Martha Raddatz brought up something that could actually bother Republicans about this national emergency declaration. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. When Trump does this and gets liberals outraged, that doesn't really matter so much, You know, those are people who already hate Donald Trump. He's not going to get their votes. But if there's some sort of attack on this that will get people who support Donald Trump, his like core 35%, if it peels away some of them, then that actually does hurt Donald Trump politically. And one way to do that is the whole, you know, executive overreach. I don't know if that's really effective. But another way is the people who support the military. That's part of the Trump base. Well, he's taking this money from military construction and in ways that are actually going to hurt the military. And Martha Raddatz pointed that out or highlighted that in her follow-up questioning of Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth, who's also a veteran. This is kind of a softball question because Martha Raddatz actually mentions that Tammy Duckworth is a veteran when highlighting how Trump is hurting the military over in this slightly less than 1 minute clip I'll talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
I don't know which specific military construction projects the funding will be taken from under this order, but senior administration officials have described it this way. It will be lower priority projects that can be delayed for a few months or into next year, and they do not impact the lethality and readiness of the military. You're a veteran. What's your response to that argument?
I don't agree with that. Let me tell you the kind of things that are on the table to be chopped right now. Crash and rescue station in Peoria, Illinois, at an airport that I flew out of as a helicopter pilot for 15 years. That's on the table. Training construction of training rifle ranges where we send our troops to become marksmen so that they can be more lethal on the battlefield. Recovery efforts in places like Tyndall Air Force Base, places where we're recovering from hurricanes, pads and hangars for the new F-35 fighter jets.
A lot of those things on the table. I just want to end this. If this national emergency is upheld, do you believe it opens the door for Democrats?
So, like I said, that's a pretty strong argument that might actually hurt Trump with his base. And it's also made by Republican Will Hurd over in his appearance on CBS's Face the Nation, which Margaret Brennan highlighted in the follow-up question here. This is also a kind of softball question setting up this attack on Donald Trump, which, like I said, is a especially valuable attack because it hurts Trump not with the libs who he's supposed to be getting all irate, and that like helps him with his base when he owns the libs or makes the libs all upset. But this is something that actually hurts the military, which that's part of Trump's base. And Will Hurd talks about that here. And then actually, as I said at the beginning of the program here, Will Hurd actually, he sounds like a reasonable Republican. That's like a unicorn. So this is a unicorn sighting, reasonable Republican. I don't know exactly why, but I'll talk about that a little more with you after we watch that clip together over here.
Clear, you are saying that this wall that you don't think the United States needs on national security grounds will actually adversely impact national security because it will hurt the readiness of some of these military bases in your district?
If you're taking money away from the military, we just spent the last 4 years rebuilding our military, making sure the men and women in our armed forces have the tools that they need. I don't want to see that money being taken away from that. We went through a number of hearings and investigations in order to figure out where that money needs to go. And so that is how our government is supposed to operate.
And you're confident that Congress can stop that money from being raided from those military construction funds? The $3.6 billion.
I would say that people are going to be exploring how that can ultimately be done because we're in uncharted territory. But I want to also make it clear that $67 billion worth of drugs are coming into our country. 400,000 people came to our country illegally last year. We have a problem at our border. We don't have what I call operational control of our border, meaning we know everything's going back and forth across our border. So this is a problem. And the only way we solve the problem is looking at all 2,000 miles of our southern border at the same time. And the only way you can do that is with manpower and technology. In some places, a physical barrier makes sense where there's urban-to-urban contact. Again, we already have 654 miles of physical barrier. So we got to be thinking about the strategy, not a focus on just one tool within that strategy.
Congressman, thank you very much for joining us this Sunday.
So what do you think? Reasonable Republican? Is that an oxymoron? Will Hurd kind of sounded reasonable there, and that's why I put him in the middle of the Democrats talking about the national emergency, because he was also talking about the way that you heard the wall, which actually hurts our national security, is also taking money away from military projects that are more important, and that's coming from Republican Will Hurd, who is a former CIA agent. So that could actually hurt Trump with his base, as I mentioned multiple times in those last couple clips. The last three clips I have are all from Democrats. Actually, it's one of the Attorney General here in California, where I am living, where I broadcast from. Xavier Becerra is the first clip, and then there are two clips from Adam Schiff. The first Adam Schiff clip is also on the national emergency issue, and then the final clip is the Adam Schiff collusion update of the week that I promised at the beginning of the program. But first, this is Martha Raddatz bringing up an important weakness in the attack on Trump's declaration of a national emergency. I mentioned this earlier, that the National Emergencies Act basically gives the power to the president and doesn't really say what a national emergency is. And that means that in terms of a statutory attack on the declaration of a national emergency, it doesn't really give, it makes that kind of a weak argument, though there's a constitutional argument that Xavier Becerra kind of talks about, which I will talk to you about a little more after we watch that 2.5-minute clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, questioning from Martha Raddatz, which, like I said at the beginning of the program, I think she has the clearest understanding of the actual legal issues, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Act gives the president very broad authority on what qualifies an emergency. So where do you believe he's really overstepped his bounds, given this very vague law?
Well, he himself said it. He did not need to announce or declare a crisis. He did not have to call this an emergency. He has also said he knows he's going to lose in court, and he's hoping that he can count on a conservative court in the Supreme Court to give him a victory, because he knows he's going to lose all the way up the ladder of the courts, the federal court system. And so it's become clear that this is not an emergency, not only because no one believes it is, but because Donald Trump himself has said it's not. But there is enough evidence to show that this is not the 9/11 crisis that we faced back in 2001. It's not the Iran hostage crisis we faced in 1979. It's not even the type of national emergency where we are trying to take action against a foreign enemy or to avoid some type of harm befalling Americans abroad. And so it's clear that this is
But
not
Mr. Attorney General, let me stop you there, because you talk about 9/11. There have been 58 national emergencies declared since the law was passed in 1976, including 3 by President Trump, most recently for violence in Nicaragua. So why should the president have the authority to declare a national emergency for that and not for this, which he clearly does see as a national emergency?
Well, there certainly may be some declarations that are dubious, just like this one is. But typically, our presidents have focused on issues where the national interests are clearly at stake. The national interests aren't at stake here. We have the lowest level of entries into the country by those who don't have permission than we've had in some 20 years. The Department of Homeland Security itself has said to the president that it is more difficult to cross into the U.S. at our land borders than it has been in a long time. And so it's clear that this isn't an emergency. It's clear that in the mind of Donald Trump, he needs to do something to try to fulfill a campaign promise. That doesn't constitute a national emergency. That would require us to essentially stand down on all sorts of federal laws and also violate the U.S. Constitution.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Attorney General. We appreciate you.
So that was a whole argument about how the facts don't really support there being a national emergency. But as I said earlier, the problem is the National Emergencies Act. And there's a link down in the video description to the Brennan Center page about various statutes that give emergency powers to the president. And the National Emergencies Act is the paramount one that sort of like says how the president declares a national emergency, and then he has to find additional statutory authority, and that's the 10 U.S.C. 2808 military construction authority that he's used for the national emergency funding. That's like $3.5 billion of the funding he's looking for. But the problem, Xavier Becerra was talking about the deficiencies of this congressional statute, the National Emergencies Act, that the facts don't match an emergency, but there's nothing in the act that requires the president to define the emergency in any way. And so if there's any real problem, it's with the National Emergencies Act, not with Trump's declaration of a national emergency, that Congress has delegated too much authority to the president. That would be the constitutional argument, not that Trump did something wrong, but that Congress back in 1976 did something wrong. And you know, there's this thing, this legal maxim, bad facts make bad law. But in this case, it's like bad facts show that we've made a bad law, because it took Donald Trump's bad use of the National Emergencies Act to show that the National Emergencies Act itself is an unconstitutional delegation of authority to the president. And that's kind of brought up in this Adam Schiff explanation of what's wrong with the declaration of the national emergency here. Although, kind of like the last clip there with Xavier Becerra, the California Attorney General, he dwells a lot more on the bad facts than the actual bad law that is unconstitutional. And that's the final clip on the national emergency issue before I get to Adam Schiff doing his Trump collusion update for the week in the final news clip after this. But this is the penultimate clip, which I will discuss with you after we watch it together. Danabash talking to Adam Schiff about the declaration of a national emergency to build the wall over here.
But first, I want to ask you about the president's decision to declare a national emergency on the border. You called the decision, quote, plainly unconstitutional. But the law does give the president broad discretion on when to invoke these statutes, and Congress has never really defined what a national emergency is. So why is it unconstitutional?
Well, because this is the first time a president has tried to declare an emergency when Congress explicitly rejected funding for the particular project that the president is advocating. And in saying just the other day that he didn't really need to do this, he just wanted to do it because it would help things go faster, he's pretty much daring the court to strike this down. So it's hard to imagine a poor case, but I'll say this, Dana, it is going to be a real test for my GOP colleagues in Congress and their devotion to the institution. If we give away, if we surrender the power of the purse, which is our most important power, there will be little check and no balance left. It'll not be a separation of powers anymore, just a separation of parties. So this is going to be a moment of truth for my GOP colleagues.
Well, and you're referring, of course, to what the House is likely to do, and later the Senate, which is a joint resolution to terminate the president's national emergency. But let me ask you about potentially going a step further, because that would be hard to get a veto-proof majority on in both chambers. Do you think that Congress should actually change the law so that the president can no longer declare a national emergency without the support of Congress?
Well, there are reasons why a president should have an ability to declare an emergency that is under a real emergency. That's plainly not the case here. And the risk that the president takes, the risk to future presidencies, is that we limit the president's power to act when it really is necessary, when it is not practical to bring the Congress into session on a moment's notice. But this president doesn't care about future presidents. He only cares about himself. And in this case, he only cares about placating his conservative critics.
So that was Adam Schiff, I think, talking again about the bad facts, but not really answering the question about the problem with the law of the National Emergencies Act and whether it delegates too much authority to the president. There's actually this whole delegation doctrine that says there has to be like an intelligible guidance or whatever that the Congress gives to the president when they delegate that kind of authority. And John Roberts has actually been, the Chief Justice has been an advocate of putting more strictures on that delegation doctrine. So to answer Derek Levin's question from almost, what was that, like over an hour ago here. It's possible that even some conservatives on the court might find some reason to find the National Emergencies Act unconstitutional, delegating too much power from the Congress to the executive. As to whether it's an illegal Trump action, that would be more under the 10 U.S.C. 2808 military construction statutory authority, where this goes well beyond any other previous use, and it's not military construction, it's like a wall out in the middle of nowhere. So anyway, that's my legal analysis. That's my last clip on the national emergency issue, and now I'm going to get to the final news clip on the Adam Schiff Trump collusion update. This week there's been more revelations about Roger Stone. Of course, Paul Manafort got possibly a 25-year sentence, basically a life sentence. That's the information in the introduction here from Dana Bash. This is edited. The part that's missing is the Adam Schiff answer on national emergencies that I just showed you. That was about 2 minutes that are cut out of this clip, which is all about Russian collusion, and Adam Schiff explains why it is that there's a lot of evidence of collusion, why he thinks the Senate Intelligence Committee said no collusion when there really is collusion, and also his reaction to the direct connection between Roger Stone and the Russians through like Guccifer 2.0 and WikiLeaks in the final clip that I am going to show before my bonus Dash and Sandy clip for the Dash and Sandy fans. Oh, and speaking of the fans out there, I appreciate the super chat contributions I've gotten so far. I saw this. Thanks to all those contributions. Thanks to Lulu Girl for giving a contribution for Sexy Bob. That's one of several ways you can support my videos. I'll talk a little bit more about that after I show you the final news clip and the bonus Dash and Sandy clip. Here's the Adam Schiff Trump collusion update that I think is pretty serious, and I'll talk about that with you a little more after we watch together over here.
More legal trouble for former Trump associates. The special counsel is recommending up to 24 years in prison for former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort for financial crimes, as prosecutors revealed for the first time that they uncovered direct communications between Roger Stone and WikiLeaks, an allegation that raises more questions about how involved the former Trump associate was in getting information about hacked Russian emails. Joining me now is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff of California. There are so many questions to get to about the Russia investigation. Let's talk about the Mueller investigation. We learned on Friday that the special counsel obtained evidence of Roger Stone's direct communication with WikiLeaks, which he had said before didn't exist. And we also know that Stone was coordinating with a senior Trump campaign official, and those emails were hacked by the Russians. So what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that, as we have seen in other cases that the special counsel has brought, the full story is not in the indictment, that it is very possible that the best evidence is yet to come, that in fact here there were search warrants executed on multiple accounts of these Russian hackers that reveal communications between Roger Stone and WikiLeaks and essentially directly with the GRU and Roger Stone, because the GRU was acting with the persona Guccifer II. The substance of those communications can be very telling. It may go to what Roger Stone was trying to find out. It may go to whether he was communicating that information to people back in the White House. It could be very revealing, and we'll just have to wait to find out.
This week, the chair, your counterpart in the Senate, the Republican chair of the Intelligence Committee, Richard Burr, said that his committee has found nothing to suggest collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. You said, quote, "That's not our view in the House." But you know, Burr hasn't exactly been a rabid partisan on this until the last couple of weeks. He's been working very closely with the Democrats. So why do you think he's wrong?
Well, it's not just that I think he's wrong. Mark Warner, the vice chair of the Intel Committee in the Senate, also disagrees with that assessment. But look, you can see evidence in plain sight on the issue of collusion, pretty compelling evidence. Now, there's a difference between seeing evidence of collusion and being able to prove a criminal conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt. But Chairman Burr must have a different word for it, because when you look, for example, at the emails to set up the meeting in Trump Tower, it was offered to the Trump campaign, to the president's own son, dirt on Hillary Clinton as part of what was described as the Russian government's effort to help Donald Trump in the campaign. And the response from the campaign was, "We would love to have the help." Now, that's an offer of help. That's an acceptance of help. There's an overt act in the Trump Tower in furtherance of that. And of course, that's not even contemplating the discussions with George Papadopoulos or the information about the efforts that Mike Flynn made to work with the Russian ambassador secretly to undermine sanctions and then lie about that. All of this is evidence of collusion. And you either have to look the other way to say it isn't, or you have to have a different word for it, because it is a corrupt dealing with a foreign adversary during a campaign. But again, it will be up to Mueller to determine whether that amounts to criminal conspiracy.
Well, on that note, we expect at some point, maybe soon, maybe not, the findings of the Mueller investigation to finally be completed.
And February, March, that's what the reporting was from NBC months ago. And there's been other indications the Mueller investigation may be wrapping up this month or next month. Who knows? That could be a really big breaking news story. But I think you saw from that clip that Adam Schiff is actually getting pretty good at summarizing all the evidence of Russian collusion that we already can see, that's already in plain sight. And there were 10 words I want to highlight that Adam Schiff said in that last clip. "It's quite possible the best evidence is yet to come." Did you hear those 10 words? It's quite possible the best evidence is yet to come. And that's the Mueller report, maybe, maybe not, who knows? I guess we'll find out. I hope you appreciate me picking out those 10 words to highlight for you and these 18 clips that I picked out for you. That's my news summary, my news criticism, my political analysis. I did promise you an 8-second clip of Dash and Sandy interaction. This is right before the show. This is the kind of interaction they usually have, that Sandy the dog tries to sniff or lick Dash the cat, and Dash runs away, as you will see in this very brief clip over here. So that's the brief Sandy and Dash interaction. I hope you appreciated that. You appreciated the time I spent all day every Sunday for the last 303 or 304 Sundays picking out the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows, putting it together with some political comedy and my media criticism and political commentary. And I will be back doing that this week or next week and every week for the foreseeable future. And until next week, or until I have some reason to upload some sort of edited, produced video. I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.